In the early hours of the 7th of June 2018, a body is found in Kirriemuir, Scotland.
And they make a horrific discovery.
The deceased has been found in a remote location, very little CCTV, no witnesses.
Police are called to investigate this unprecedented crime.
It wasn't a normal sort of crime. You don't see a police presence of that scale in a town like Kerry unless there's been something.
Who's his friends? More importantly, who's his enemies?
I think it's worth reminding ourselves that in the majority of murder cases, the victim and the killer are well known to each other.
The victim's digital footprint reveals crucial evidence about the murder.
I feel like it shows how calculated the whole thing was and how calm and composed she was, knowing ultimately what was taking place while she went home and relaxed.
Kirriemuir, often known as Kirrie, is an idyllic burgh in Angus, Scotland.
Angus is a rural county situated on the east coast of Scotland. It's known for its diverse scenery, right, from like rugged coastline and then more inland to like the Angus Glens. There's a lot of farmland in the area and it's bordered by the Cairngorm Mountains. There's some rich history in the area in the form of Glamis Castle and Arbroath Abbey.
Kirriemuir's a small agricultural village in the Angus region. It's about a 35-minute drive from Arbroath. Very nice place to live, great family place, very close-knit, very rural. Everybody knows everybody, one of the type of places, and not much goes on. Especially when darkness falls, there's not particularly anything open, nobody's really going about, and a particularly family-friendly place to live.
Kirriemuir is a lovely little town. It's the town I grew up in, went to school there, all my friends were there. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's pretty, we're famous for J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan.
Typically or historically there's been a lot of farmers or tradespeople that reside in the area and a lot of people that are commuters, you know, they're residents there but they commute to local towns for work, so Forfar or Dundee.
There's not a lot of crime that happens. The crime rate is very low. Violence in particular is particularly low, and serious violence is pretty much non-existent.
But a shocking discovery is about to change everything.
It was the early hours of Thursday, the 7th of June 2018, when a couple of workers for the Royal Society Protection of Birds arrived at Kinnordy Loch, a nature reserve, a number of miles away from Kirriemuir, and they make a horrific discovery. They discover a burnt out car, and lying beside the car, a very badly burnt and charred human body. Police are called and they descend onto Kinnordy Loch and they meet a scene of horror. They look at the body and they realise this person has been violently and horrifically murdered. One police officer said in 26 years of police experience he had never come across a body as badly disfigured and brutalised.
There's a lot of aspects of policing that you just take, you know, for granted day to day, but something like that is extremely shocking regardless of whether you're a police officer or not. It's not something that you see every day, and I think it really comes down to the individual in terms of how they were to react to that individual situation, just like any serious crime and witnessing that, or turning up to the aftermath of a serious crime like that.
Upon police being contacted and attending the crime scene, it would have escalated the incident majorly, especially due to the steps that had been taken to cover up the crime that had been committed, the ultra-violence that was used, and in particular the vehicle that had been burnt out.
Police cordoned off the scene in the hopes of preventing information being leaked to the media.
a decision that's made by the senior investigating officer, so that would be the person in charge of the overall incident and the overall murder case in this case. It's a decision that is taken after a lot of consultation and a lot of consideration in terms of what evidence or what information to release in order to ascertain what you could potentially get back.
I was working, it was in the morning, I was contacted by a contact to say, do you want to head out and about? There's an awful lot of police in Kerry, there's a helicopter over Kinnordy Loch, there's something going on. So I went into the town and there was police presence in the town, and went out to the road out to Kinnordy, and it was completely closed off by the police. There was no access along that road. Being local, I thought, oh, well, I know other little places to take me in, trying to be smart, but no, the police had every access, even a little path, that not many people know about. It was all shut off. So it was a case then of, okay, what's happened? Through people in Kerry, through contacts, through friends, I was getting snippets of what had actually happened. But nobody at that point knew, and these stories, they grow arms and legs, and you've got to sift through to get to the truth of it. And obviously in touch with the police press office to find out, not getting a lot at that point. But I think the one thing that people were aware of, that whatever had happened, it wasn't a normal sort of crime. It sounded pretty bad, it seemed pretty bad. You don't see a police presence of that scale in a town like Kerry unless there's been something.
Detectives inspect the scene for any source of identification on the body or the car.
The body had significant injuries in terms of cuts and blunt force trauma, and due to how badly burnt both the car and the body were, initial identification proved extremely difficult.
The car was so badly burnt out and charred that there was no identifiable or distinguishable features about the car to lead to its identity.
Registration plates of the car were not present, so the investigators were able to find the VIN plate or the engine number.
And when police looked at that, it was registered to a white BMW N1, which is a relatively rare car in that part of Scotland because it was a very expensive car. And that just made police believe, was this some sort of financial falling out amongst members of a criminal organisation?
Regardless of whether it's attached to serious and organised crime or not, in that particular case, it was a serious crime that had been committed regardless of whether it was associated to a larger crime group, whether that be from, a big city or wherever. The process of investigating that doesn't change. You have an inner cordon and an outer cordon, and you really try and preserve the evidence as best you can.
Unfortunately, due to the damage done to the car and to the body, there was nothing that could lead them to identifying who the body was. All documentation in the car had been burnt. The pockets or anything belonging to the individual had been burnt. They did discover a mobile phone, which, whilst burnt, they still had some hope they could get to work, but unfortunately they couldn't. What they did have, however, was the registration of the vehicle, which was registered to a man called Stephen Donaldson. But police once again didn't know if Stephen Donaldson was the registered owner of the car or if he was the body found beside the car. That had to be established.
Later that day, Stephen Donaldson's mum and dad reported him missing. They were worried because they knew that a body had been found at Kinnordy Nature Reserve. They knew the previous night he'd been up that neck of the woods, he'd been up in that area, so they were fearing the worst.
We actually got in touch with the police and reported Stephen missing, and after making contact with them, 2 detectives came to the house and took any information that we could give them regarding any identifying marks that he has, and we told them that he had a tattoo on his shoulder.
These tattoos were still visible on the remains that were found next to the burnt out vehicle, and that provided a match. It was then confirmed that the deceased that was found, that was the body of Stephen Donaldson.
Any death message, regardless, is really difficult to deliver. But on this particular case, given the severity of what actually happened to the victim in this case, it's made all the more harder.
You're still trying to, sort of exist as a family, because we've got the grandchildren there as well. And it was very, very difficult, and it was like walking on eggshells sometimes, Everybody had their own feelings. We're pretty much all the same. Disbelief, hatred for whoever's done this, all that kind of thing. But not really saying much about it, if that makes sense.
Police confirm the body to be that of Stephen Donaldson, but many other questions remain unanswered. Who did this? Why? And was this a once-off killing, or are there more to come? Kirriemuir, Scotland. On the 7th of June 2018, the body of 27-year-old Stephen Donaldson was found brutalised beneath a burnt-out car. With no immediate leads, police need to learn more about Stephen to find out how, why, and who was responsible for his murder.
Due to the limited investigative opportunities that are available at that time, the deceased has been found in a remote location, very little CCTV, no witnesses, apart from the workers that found him, but they can only offer little information. You have to build a picture of his life and get a background on him. Who's his friends? More importantly, who's his enemies? Does anyone have a motive to harm Stephen? What has he been involved in the days and weeks leading up to his murder? And try and establish how he ended up in that car park at that particular time and how he came about sustaining fatal injuries.
Stephen Donaldson was a 27-year-old oil refinery worker. He worked offshore. He was from the town of Arbroath in Angus. He was a very popular young man. He worked very hard. He had a good job, which was well paid.
Highly thought of by friends, family. He was someone who appeared to be extremely well liked, funny, and friends have described him as someone who nobody had a bad word to say against.
Stephen was a great kid, but just like any boy, he was mischievous, the same as everyone else. He loved sport, very clever. He just loved cars, bikes as well. He had quite a few cars and 2 or 3 bikes. It was just like normal petrolhead, if that's the word for it,
As part of the investigation, the investigators would have looked into the intelligence surrounding the victim, the intelligence surrounding anyone that appeared to be involved. Having done that, there was no ties to serious and organised crime. They had spoken to friends and family. They had done all their background checks in terms of what intelligence was available of the victim, of his, close-knit group of friends and, family even. But there was no ties to serious and organised crime on this occasion.
However, whilst doing that, they still couldn't find a motive. It was a bit of a bizarre mystery. Who would want to do this to this popular young man? He was known as Stevie D. He was called a bit of a practical joker who loved to laugh and night out with his friends. The police could find nothing to point to an initial motive as to why this young man would have his life ended in such a horrific way.
Stephen's autopsy reveals vital information about his murder.
Stephen had sustained absolutely ferocious and devastating injuries. He had received several blows to the back of his head, his neck. These blows were given with such force that severed his spinal cord. He'd been stabbed, he'd been slashed, and he'd had defensive wounds as well, showing that he actually fought for his life. He was unsuccessful, he was overpowered, and the violence was that horrific that eventually resulted in his death.
Due to the position of some of the lacerations or how the attack had been conducted, it's been assessed that this may have even happened in his car and that he was removed from the car after this took place.
The level of violence that was used in Stephen's murder shows that it was personal. It wasn't a spontaneous act.
An overkill, almost like someone that you know and you have a really strong hatred for. I don't think that's too strong a word to use on this occasion. I think as well, just given the fact that some of the wounds appear to have taken place whilst he was sat in a car, There's an element of him having been ambushed to some degree, or a surprise attack that's taken place.
With most of the physical evidence destroyed, police turned to any available digital evidence.
The police, when they initially looked within the vehicle just for any signs of any evidence, they did find a mobile phone, but it was really badly burnt. Now, with some burnt mobile phones, depending on how badly burnt they are, you can take them apart, right? You can find the SD card or the memory, or you can access the actual card data itself. Now, sometimes that requires a bit of manipulation in terms of putting things back together. However, in this case, this phone was so badly gone that it was just not something that could be done, and there was no way that it could be analysed.
The police, when they spoke to Stephen's circle of friends, were passed a very useful piece of information. They were told that Stephen's phone had recently been broken, wasn't working properly. He had taken it to an Apple store in Aberdeen, and the police went to that store. They examined their CCTV and they could see Stephen there. When they spoke to the worker in question who dealt with Stephen and his complaint, his inquiry, the worker confirmed to police that Stephen had backed up his mobile phone data and information on another device, and the police had to find that device. That turned out to be Stephen Donaldson's laptop, and when police got into his laptop and they found the mobile phone data which had been backed up, they discovered that he had been in a relationship with a 19-year-old woman called Tasman Glass.
So in this particular case, with it being a murder investigation, you want to look at the broadest spectrum of data that you possibly can, right? So you don't really want to rule anything out when it comes to the data, so it's just something that takes some time. Now, as the investigation develops and as you begin to understand who are persons of interest or who you really want to hone in on in terms of some of those communications that have taken place between the victim and potential suspects or persons of interest, you can start to narrow that data down. However, until such times you do have, a broader lens to start off with. So it is something that takes time, and it has to be that way because you can't start to filter out what could be obviously essential or important evidence.
Police look into Tasman Glass to get a better picture of her and Stephen's relationship.
Tasman Glass was 19 years of age, so she was a number of years younger than Stephen. They had met the year before. They had established a relationship relatively quickly. She was described by those who knew her as a normal young woman. She was an aspiring singer and actress. Police spoke to Tasman Glass, and she told them that on the night in question, Wednesday the 6th of June, she had been swimming with her friends Stephen Dickey, Callum Davidson and Claire Ogston. She said that after the swimming was over, they went back to Callum Davidson's flat, and she left them to go and meet Stephen at Peter Pan Park in Kerrymere. She said she arrived there and waited for Stephen. He didn't show up. She then said that she went home, conversed with her mother for a brief period, and she went to bed and went to sleep. And she said she didn't contact Stephen or attempt to contact him until the next morning, when she said she sent him a text message. Tasman was expecting a child to Stephen. She had been treated very well by Stephen. He had bought her a new car, which she subsequently had written off, and he was owed £1,000 by her as part of the insurance payout, which she had not yet gave him. So belief was that she was going to meet him that night to give him back the money that she owed him. The police were under the impression that this was the father of her child. They found her demeanour strange, unusually calm, cool, collected, bearing in mind her boyfriend and father of her child had been brutally murdered and his killer or killers were still out there. The police were initially a little bit perplexed by this. The police want to verify what Tasman Glass is saying. As part of that process, they go to speak to the people she said she was with that night so they could verify her movements. That was Stephen Dickey, Callum Davidson and his partner Claire Ogston. All three confirmed her account that they had went swimming. They went back to Callum and Claire's flat and they were drinking beer, chilling out, and they said the Tasman had went to Peter Pan Park to meet Stephen, and the rest of them fell asleep around 12:30. So that was their version of events, and the police then checked Tasman's Apple Watch. The Apple Watch was linked up to her Wi-Fi router at home, and the data from that router in connection with the Apple Watch indicated that she did arrive home just after 11 p.m. as she claimed, and it also took her heart rate, which was very normal, very stabilised, wasn't peaking or going up or anything out of the ordinary. So police believed that she did go to sleep as she said. So at this point, Tasman Glass is a witness, and her friends are at that point witnesses as well.
So police then start to look at Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson. Standard in any police investigation that you do background checks on who is featured in the inquiry, and immediately Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson are persons interested in the investigation. They're not suspects, they're more leaning towards witnesses at that time. They have only featured in the investigation so far after being named by Tasman Glass as being swimming with her the night that her boyfriend went missing. But red flags start to get raised when police start looking into who Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson are. They're known as local bullies. They've been previously involved in violence and intimidation towards locals. Callum Davidson was previously charged with serious assault and was subsequently found guilty of assault to severe injury at court. So they're not nice individuals to start with, and more needs to be done, and they need to be looked into further to see what their connection, if any, to Stephen is.
Police suspect Stephen's girlfriend and two men may have killed Stephen, but they need solid evidence to prove it. Kirriemuir, Scotland. Police are investigating the brutal murder of 27-year-old Stephen Donaldson on the 7th of June 2018. His girlfriend, 19-year-old Tasman Glass, provides police with a solid alibi, but suspicions arise about her and two friends.
Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson were spoken to by the police. They provided almost identical version of events, which is suspicious in itself. They said that they had a few beers, went to sleep about midnight that night at Claire Oxon's house.
As well as examining Tasman's Apple Watch, police also confiscate the phones of Stephen Dickey and others. When they examine Stephen Dickey's phone, they see that he hadn't received a phone call or a text message for 2 weeks, which is very strange and very hard to believe.
Phones tell a lot in this day and age. Everybody uses a phone for this thing or that thing. So part of the inquiry team's investigation was to contact the phone company. And there are several requests that the police can put into a phone company under what's called the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act. And one of these was billing request. So a billing request is in-out call data. And in-out call data shows incoming and outgoing calls made to a particular phone number or made from a particular phone number. Even if it's right from the phone by the user of that phone, the phone company's still going to show that in the logs. You can't delete it from there. The user can't delete it from the phone company logs. So the sheer amount of phone calls that were made to and from Stephen Dickey's phone contradicted what had been on his phone and just proved that he had deleted a vast amount of data, further proving his involvement in something shady that went on.
When an investigation like this takes place, a digital forensics investigation, and that data is acquired, it will be presented in what is effectively like a database. So you can look to filter on telephone numbers. Now you'll have telephone numbers that are attached to persons of interest or suspects or, specific relationships that you want to, as part of the murder investigation, understand how those were and how that had played out prior to the incidents taking place or the murder taking place. Now, that can just be filtered in the same way that you can filter a spreadsheet, and the text information will be there and it will be a ledger.
But it's Stephen's own device that reveals crucial information.
Police further examined Stephen Dickey's phone and discovered that he had an app on the Apple phone called a Significant Locations app. That app can store information regarding your movements and places you're close to and places you have visited. When police examined the app data, they discovered that between 12:40 a.m. and 12:51 a.m. the significant location was the health centre in Kerrymoor that Stephen Dickey's phone was near. That contradicts what he tells detectives, that by 12:30 they're all sleeping in the flat after having consumed some beers.
When it comes to locating people based on their mobile devices, now whenever you're carrying your mobile devices, you walk down the street, it's hitting different phone masts. So it's hitting off the nearest phone mast effectively just to facilitate telephone calls at times. And that's how, a triangulation can take place based on the location of that phone in relation to the location of that phone mast. As you're moving around with your phone and it is pinging those masts, there's timestamps that are associated with that. There can be, depending on whether it's 2G, 3G, 4G, there's effectively a diameter circulation, effectively it can show you rough distances in terms of where you are in relation to that phone mast, and you can have the identification of that phone effectively that has made that request to that phone mast.
The police then go to the CCTV cameras at the health centre, and at 12:49 a.m. they can see two distinct figures walking past the health centre, which matches the data on the Significant Locations app on his Apple phone. And the police assume that one of those people is Stephen Dickey and the other presumably is Callum Davidson.
In this instance, it appears that it's been very, very simple. They've got CCTV of Stephen Dickey, they've got CCTV of Callum Davidson, and they've got phone data which contradicts what Stephen and Callum are telling the police. This appears on right away to be easy. It's not easy. It's very, very complicated. It's very complex. There has to be a CCTV coordinator appointed along with CCTV officers. They need to complete viewing logs. They need to seize the relevant discs. The footage isn't always available at that particular time. It can involve going cross-border. It can involve contacting other countries who store this data on clouds now. It's not always, even though the camera's in a particular place, doesn't mean to say that the physical evidence is going to be that particular place. There's also an entire intelligence department that's going to be doing downloads of phones. And you can imagine in this day and age that there is a vast amount of data stored on mobile phones, so it can take weeks, months, sometimes to go through a single phone. So it's important that priorities are set right away. Specific dates are set and worked back from. Specific keywords are used and searched through messages at particular times. You can't go through hundreds of thousands of WhatsApps and texts. Specific contacts are selected to focus in on, especially when analysing digital data.
So as part of this investigation, the police seized Stephen Dickey's Apple Watch, and this was found to contain a lot of information that contradicted Stephen Dickey's version of events. Now, information that's contained within an Apple Watch is interesting, and it presents itself in a really user-friendly and readable manner for police when they investigate it. Again, effectively, like I alluded to before, presents itself almost in a database fashion, where there's steps that are recorded under the Apple Health facility within the watch. So there's steps, there's distances, there's your heart rate, and it's all effectively filterable so that it can be read easily with associated timestamps. So when Stephen Dickey was stating that he was back within a house during that time, and the analysis of the phone was found to have climbed 11 flights of stairs and had over 400 metres of movement, and this was all during a time that he had claimed to have been sleeping. Treasure trove of information, and the police really relied on that a lot in this case.
Police at this point decide to go back and speak to Taz McGlass, and they go and visit her at her place of work, a local cafe, and they find this bizarre behaviour by Thompson. They find her standing there in the cafe, preparing food, and chatting to them very matter-of-factly, very generalised conversation, as if she was talking about her next holiday or her next day off or her plans for the next day. Very strange reaction from her. In fact, It's almost say it was a sign of psychopathy, because again, this is the father of her expected child, her boyfriend. She's acting very strangely. Anyone else would take the police to the side, would focus on what they're saying and try and help as much as possible. But she's very cool, calm, collected. But it was a worthwhile visit, because she did tell the police that she had been having a sexual relationship with Stephen Dickey, and that she and Stephen Donaldson had split up a number of months before in April. Police thought that they were dealing with a devastated girlfriend and a mother-to-be who was in love with Stephen Donaldson. But when Tamsin revealed that she'd been having sexual relations with another man, Stephen Dickey, it pointed to flaws in her initial statement, and it made the police see her in a different light than just a witness trying to assist with their inquiries. I think it's worth reminding ourselves that in the majority of murder cases, the victim and the killer are well known to each other, and that's something else. When the police were struggling to come up with the motive, they would have been aware of that. The police, now having been aware of the sexual relationship between Tasman Glass and Stephen Dickey, decide to go back and speak to Claire Ogston again. And this is a major breakthrough in the overall investigation and its arc. Claire Ogston tells the police a completely different version of events from her initial statement. She tells the police that on the night in question, Tasman Glass is visibly upset because she is receiving phone calls from Stephen Donaldson. She says that Tasman Glass, Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson leave their home and travel to Peter Pan Park. Davidson and Dickey come back in the early hours of the morning, and they tell Claire Ogston that they subjected Stephen Donaldson to a physical attack, and that Tamsin Glass was present in the initial stages of the attack.
During the course of the incident, it was found that Tasman Glass, who had evidently had been there at the very start of this incident starting to take place, she left early, right at the very start of it, and returned home. And during this whole time, she's been wearing a smartwatch. When she returned home, she calmly entered the house, got ready for bed, spoke to her mum, went to bed, and presumably had a good sleep. Evidence that was acquired from that smartwatch showed that, her heart rate was a low, resting heart rate. Considering what she was involved in at the very start, and ultimately what she walked away from to go home, I feel like it shows how calculated the whole thing was, and how calm and composed she was, knowing ultimately what was taking place while she went home and relaxed.
But that sense of relaxation would not last long.
After this new statement from Claire Ogston, police immediately go and arrest Stephen Dickey, Callum Davidson, and, crucially, Tasman Glass.
Can you have the stand by your side, please? Do you want to speak to the lawyer in private before being questioned by the police? The reason you're being kept in custody is an allegation of murder.
All three are non-committal during the interview process. They are very cold, laid back. They give non-responses like no comment. They aren't letting anything away.
Is there going to be any forensic evidence linking you to the murder of Stephen Donaldson?
Will your phone have any information on it, any evidence or material relating to the murder? No.
Is there any reason for the police to have forensic evidence linking you to the murder?
Police are particularly perturbed by Tasman Glass. She sits there, she stares at the officers, straight through them. Very cool, calm, calculated, collected. There's no expression of emotion. At one stage, the detective asks her, does she know how serious this is? And she still doesn't respond with any kind of normal human reaction.
Okay, Tasman, you're responsible for the murder of Stephen Donaldson.
You have been arrested on the suspicion of Stephen's murder. Okay? How did he deserve to be left in that car park with these injuries?
She was as cold and as calculating as could be.
Were you involved in the plot to kill Stephen Dawson?
No comment.
Was it so you would stop hassling for the money?
No comment.
Stephen Dickey or Callum Davison tell you what they've done. And if they did tell you, how did you react? Is it like you're sitting now, or would you have been shocked? Did you hear what I just said to you there? And your demeanour's still no changed. And you're still sitting there,
No comment.
emotionless. You can sit and stare at me all you like. That'll not put me off.
Tasman, for a 19-year-old girl to go home, go to her bed and then provide a calm, no-comment interview is displaying psychopath behaviour. She showed absolutely no remorse whatsoever.
Tasman's apathy leaves investigators unsettled and without the necessary answers. Police are confident the 3 suspects in custody are responsible for Stephen Donaldson's murder, but without confessions, they'll need an airtight case to prove their guilt in court. Kirriemuir, Scotland. Police have arrested 3 individuals in connection with the horrific murder of 27-year-old Stephen Donaldson on the 7th of June 2018. His ex-girlfriend, 19-year-old Tasman Glass, and 24-year-old Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson. However, in questioning, none of them are cooperative. Police need to source further evidence to ensure a guilty verdict.
CCTV inquiries were undertaken, captures Callum Davidson cycling throughout Kirriemuir town centre. Not a care in the world, wearing quite distinctive clothing at the same time at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Were you out on the bike on the early hours of the morning? And we have CCTV evidence of you out with the house at that time. How will you explain that?
Forensic examination was later conducted of the bike Callum Davidson was riding. Blood lifts were obtained from the handlebars and a DNA profile was obtained from the blood lifts. The blood lifts matched Stephen Donaldson.
Which proves that Callum Davidson had to be in the vicinity of Stephen Donaldson when he was murdered. Bearing in mind, police had no proof that Stephen Donaldson knew Callum Davidson or that Callum Davidson knew Stephen Donaldson. So this was a huge breakthrough.
That's absolutely compelling evidence when you couple it with all the other strands of evidence that were there that night.
Despite difficulties in questioning the trio, their motives eventually become evident.
At the inception of the investigation, police weren't too hopeful. There wasn't a lot of evidence there. However, the hard work of the investigation team revealed multiple strands of evidence and not only one motive but several motives. First motive is that Tasman Glass owed Stephen money. He's been phoning her constantly, asking for his money back. She didn't want to give him it, or she wasn't giving him it.
You said that you reduced Stephen £1,000. Have you got financial difficulties?
No comment.
Struggling for money?
No comment.
You told Callum that you couldn't give Stephen the money back as your bank account had been frozen. We've been contacting you for a while asking for it.
Another motive is that Stephen Dickey is now in a relationship with Tasman Glass. Stephen Dickey's ego's been damaged because his girlfriend's getting contacted by her ex. He doesn't like that and wants him out the picture. And you've also got Stephen Dickey wanting him out the picture because his ego can't handle it.
We've been told that you were unhappy that Tasman was speaking to Stephen Donaldson. Were you jealous of their relationship?
Didn't know they had a relationship, as I told you from the start.
I think it is a bit of jealousy. I think you're not happy that she's meeting up with Stephen Donaldson and she's speaking to him on the phone.
He couldn't contain his emotions during that interview. The other suspects that were interviewed, especially 19-year-old Tasman Glass, provided no comment in interviews, sat there emotionless and didn't give much away. When it's put to Stephen Dickey that he was a jealous type, immediately his ego gets the better of him. He tries to say, no I'm not, denies any involvement, but it was confirmed that he was a jealous, unpredictable, violent individual.
All three are tried for the murder of Stephen Donaldson, beginning in April 2019.
The trial took place at the High Court. Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson both tried the coward's way out.
During the murder trial, Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson more or less turned on each other and blamed each other for Stephen's murder, suggesting the other one had inflicted the fatal or serious blows. I think in most of these cases, however, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think both men were equally to blame, and both men were involved in the actual physical assault of Stephen Donaldson.
The jury ultimately rejected both their respective positions, and both were found guilty of murder. Stephen Dickey was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. Callum Davidson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. So Stephen Dickey since committed suicide in prison, so now only Callum Davidson will be available to apply for parole.
Tasman Glass was given a 10-year sentence.
Tasman Glass was found guilty of the lesser charge of culpable homicide, very similar to what manslaughter is in England. It's the unlawful killing of someone when you didn't intend to kill them. And I think what swayed the jury's mind on finding her guilty of culpable homicide was that they didn't believe she was present when Stephen was actually killed. That was purely by Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson.
Tasman's lighter sentence is poorly received by Stephen's family and police alike.
When she was sentenced to considerably lesser time than the two others, people were pretty angry at that, and there was an awful lot of talk. She's got off lightly. She was the one behind all of this. And that didn't go down well at all.
Very frustrating in terms of the sentences. When sentences are imposed, judges and lords are bound by a set of rules and regulations when handing down sentences. Sometimes you could be expecting someone to get a life sentence and never get out of prison. They could be sentenced to 8 years and out in 4. Particularly frustrating, especially in terms of serious crime.
Without her getting Stephen there, this wouldn't have happened. And she got the least sentence, and under Scottish law, they were all charged murder, the same offence, so they all should have got the sentence.
I think the role of Tasman Glass in this murder cannot be understated. She is an integral part of this plot. She is very much centrally involved. I'm not so sure this murder happens without her input, because Stephen Donaldson did not know Callum Davidson or Stephen Dickey, and they did not know him. Tasman Glass knew all three. Metaphorically, she puts the weapons in their hands, because she is the one who mentions to Callum Davidson that she is, in her words, being harassed for the money by Stephen Donaldson. She is the one that is having a sexual relationship with Stephen Dickey and taking the calls from Stephen Donaldson in Stephen Dickey's presence. She was cold, cool, calculated during the interview process for a reason. And that's because she was deeply, deeply involved. I think her role cannot be understated.
Digital forensics played a vital role in the solving of this murder case.
We'd like to thank everybody involved in catching them, and as I say, the sentencing apart from one, the work that Procurator Fisk have done, all the rest of it, I just think everybody done the job excellently, and without all the forensics and all the rest of it, I don't think they would have got away with it, but I think it would still lean towards them. But the forensics, obviously, they were the thing that nailed it down, basically.
So in this particular case, it was used for the very first time, and it was groundbreaking at the time. I think historically, cops have relied a lot on, laptops or PCs and stuff like that, but now with that move to more wearable tech, all of which connect to the internet. There's a lot more that can be examined by digital forensics investigators and adds more to their tool belt in terms of, what can be investigated and where evidence can be acquired from.
I have no doubt that this murder would have devastated Stephen's family and friends, because he seemed to be an extremely popular, well-liked and respected young man with a very bright future ahead. And for him to lose his life in such a way robbed not just him of his future, but those who loved him, their futures with him.
Sorely missed by family, friends. Everybody just misses, and an absolute waste of a life. Through 3 people which to me, I find extraordinary that a town the size of Kirriemuir can have 3 people like that at the same time. People that just didn't care about anything. Life obviously didn't matter, and I just found it such a small town, which is such a nice town. There was these 3 people there that have just absolutely destroyed that community and the life of my son, and affected all the other lives in the process.
Isle of Skye, Scotland, August 2022. A woman is viciously attacked in front of her own children.
During the assault, she feigned death and then contacted the ambulance and police. However, due to her strength diminishing, she was forced to pass the phone to her 8-year-old daughter.
As paramedics attend to the victim, police get a report of another serious incident.
Shotgun blasts, potential murder. This was one thing after the other.
He needs to be caught quick, because the police inevitably are thinking, what will he do next?
Effectively what you've got here is an active shooter.
He was heading to the house of an osteopath because he wanted to exact revenge.
It was just an extremely evil set of actions.
Isle of Skye is a remote region of Scotland's northwest coast, known for its rugged scenery, fishing villages and peaceful communities.
Skye is one of the most beautiful places in Scotland. Anyone you meet that visits Scotland, you ask them where they want to go and visit Skye. You wouldn't think that you were actually in Scotland. It is so surreal up there. A lot of historical landmarks, picturesque fishing villages.
The Isle of Skye, it's the largest island of the Inner Hebrides, and it's located off the west coast of the Scottish Highlands. It's connected to the mainland via the Skye Bridge. It's typically known for its dramatic scenery.
And this creates a community who live there full time. Very sort of inwardly looking, but a trusting community, close-knit. Everybody tends to know each other.
And that stems from the historical ages. It's always been the same families that have lived there over the years. And it's known for having a very low crime rate also.
The police are troubled by really is nothing more than a bit of antisocial behaviour. Nothing else, really.
However, on the 10th of August 2022, a disturbing 999 call would change everything.
It was the morning of the 10th of August 2022, 2 minutes past 9 in the morning. Police received a very distressing phone call. A 32-year-old woman had been attacked in her home, and she had received several very serious stab wounds to her body. That was a woman called Rowena MacDonald, a mother of 4.
Police were called to 24 Tark Savig in the Isle of Skye.
Before the police arrived, the attacker had left. During the course of the attack, she feigned death by laying on the ground still, despite bleeding profusely. That appears to have stopped any further damage being inflicted to her.
There was at least 9 stab wounds across her chest, face, arms and her back, where it punctured a lung, and she was collapsed on the floor in front of her children.
Now, when the attacker had left the locus, she managed to reach her mobile phone and contact emergency services. Now, just before she was running out of strength due to the nature of the attack,
she was able to pass the phone across to her 8-year-old daughter to explain what she had seen. Her father slicing her poor mother to within an inch of her life. The father had left his wife, he believed to be dead, on the floor of their house, had armed himself with a pump-action shotgun, which he held legally with a license, as much ammunition as he could carry, and a machete, piled it into his car, Subaru Impreza, and headed off immediately.
The medical team came upon a scene of absolute horror, and they found Rowena MacDonald barely alive, on the floor, being cradled by her 8-year-old daughter.
Immediately, the concern would be over preservation of life. Here we have a victim that's been stabbed on multiple occasions, clearly bleeding profusely, so it would just be the case of getting her immediate medical help. Rowena had to be airlifted to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow to receive the appropriate treatment that she would need, having the injuries that she sustained.
When police attend the scene, they would enter the scene being very careful and assess the crime scene. Police would establish how many children were present. They would ensure that all the children are still there, there's no children missing, and they would assess the children for injuries also. The crime scene would then be assessed, and that would be taped off. It would be protected by uniformed police officers. The only people that would be allowed in the crime scene would be the relevant forensic experts and the crime scene manager, who would coordinate all activity in relation to the crime scene. The police would try and get as much information as they could at the time from the victim. In this instance, it would have been extremely difficult to get that due to the scale of injuries that Rowena sustained. Police would have also spoke to the children through highly trained police officers. It's different when you speak to children as witnesses. It has to be done by specially trained officers. However, in this instance, the suspect's still on the loose. Immediately on police arrival, when they've assessed for injuries, ensured that everyone's safe and well, they would speak to the children to see what they've seen.
This was virtually unprecedented in the lives of all those police. They'd never been confronted with something like this, and immediately had to send all forces available to see what can be done, and of course start a manhunt.
I was on duty early that morning. We have a command and control system which documents every call that comes in. Each call there is graded priority 1 to priority 5. Priority 5 is non-urgent matters like appointments. Priority 3s are shopliftings where the offender isn't present. Priority 1s are anything involving a firearm, any life at risk calls and any high risk missing persons. I remember this one coming in as a priority 1 call.
Police barely have a chance to begin the investigation before emergency services receive another unprecedented call.
At 9:30 a.m, police receive another call
in a nearby village called Teague, which is approximately about a 17-minute drive from the initial locus. There was another extremely serious crime that took place. It was a firearms incident. A pump-action shotgun had been used to target a 47-year-old male called John McKinnon.
John McKinnon is the brother-in-law of Rowena MacDonald. Police then believe these two incidents, half an hour apart, are linked.
John and his wife had just returned that morning from a family trip to Glasgow.
At 9:15 a.m, John McKinnon's wife, Lynn Ann McKinnon, heard a noisy car pulling up to the house. When she went outside to investigate this, she met her brother, Finlay MacDonald, the husband of Rowena MacDonald, carrying a pump-action shotgun. She asked her brother what was going on, and Finlay MacDonald ignored her and walked straight past her into the house. He went straight into the kitchen and brutally shot dead his own brother-in-law, John McKinnon. He was shot at close range, and he died in his wife's arms.
By the time emergency services arrive on the scene, 39-year-old Finlay MacDonald has already fled.
Once again, police arrive to the scene within minutes. They are accompanied by a medical team, which includes 2 GPs and a number of paramedics. And they make attempts to save John McKinnon's life. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. Police are now acutely aware they have 2 major crime scenes within half an hour of each other, within a 20-minute drive of each other, and they have a suspect, Finlay MacDonald. They immediately draft in police help from throughout the Highlands to hunt this man down, because this man has brutally murdered a man and also attempted to murder his own wife in a very short period of time. He needs to be caught. He needs to be caught quick, because the police inevitably are thinking, what will he do next?
With the firearms team based in Inverness, nearly 100 miles from where MacDonald killed John McKinnon, the question remained, could they possibly arrive in time to prevent another attack? On the 10th of August 2022, in Taskavig, Isle of Skye, Finlay MacDonald brutally stabs his wife, Rowena, in front of their children. Thinking her dead, he drives to the neighbouring village of Teague and shoots his brother-in-law, John McKinnon, leaving him to die in the arms of his wife, Lynn Ann, who is also Finlay's sister. As police desperately await the arrival of a firearms team, they do all they can to de-escalate the situation.
Due to the rural landscape, there's quite a lot of area for a police double-crewed vehicle to cover. In these areas, police can be covering hundreds of square miles themselves. However, due to the police being contacted for the first incident and then again the second incident, a uniformed mobile patrol car observed Finlay MacDonald's Subaru Impreza motor vehicle. They were provided with instructions to maintain safe observations, do not approach him. That was because of the firearms threat. These police officers were not firearms trained. What they had to protect themselves was a baton, handcuffs and a taser. So they were advised to maintain safe observations until an armed response crew attended who could take over. There would have been intelligence officers carrying out background checks in relation to Finlay MacDonald. That would involve checks on his vehicle, his background check, his criminal history check, not just in Scotland but elsewhere. Intelligence checks would include, is he on the firearms register? How many firearms does he have access to? Is he a threat to the wider community? They would also be attempting to identify what digital devices does he have access to. And that would be if they lost him, which is a high chance. They could then ping his phone and see where he was. it's very challenging to get the information and build a picture whilst the crime is ongoing. There would have been officers that were obtaining information and processing that and attempting to do the various background checks. However, it's an ever-changing situation at that time. In an ideal world, they would have been able to get a lot of information from his wife. However, due to the serious injury she sustained, that was not possible, so the police were trying to work with what they had at that time.
He was a firearms enthusiast. He had a firearms certificate, and he actually possessed 6 weapons, including a pump-action shotgun. If Finlay MacDonald wants to stop his car while he's being pursued by unarmed officers and get out and fire at them, they've got no protection whatsoever. That's why it was so critical in this case for the firearms teams to get there as soon as possible.
The police are having to think ahead and close off all different routes where he can go to protect the public from populated areas, from other people's houses, and they will also be trying to identify who else has Finlay MacDonald got a grudge against. We don't know how much ammo he's got also. We don't know if he's working alongside anyone else. Is it a terrorist attack? There would have been numerous and hundreds of resources pulled in at that time. The traffic department would have been deployed, the armed response vehicles, tactical firearms unit, dog branch and public order unit would have all been deployed at that time. And the officers that were following him, it would have been a tense moment for them. They didn't know what he was capable of. They just knew that there was a maniac with a shotgun going about shooting people, and they had to do all that they can to stop him.
Police would have been feeling absolute panic because they were aware that they had this madman who had almost murdered his wife, had brutally murdered his brother-in-law. He had a pump-action shotgun. Where was he going to go next? And what was he going to do? Police rightfully knew they were in a race against time to catch him before other people lost their lives. MacDonald then goes to the bridge that connects the Isle of Skye to mainland Scotland. He goes over the bridge and the police don't know where he's going or what his plans are.
Once he'd gone over the bridge to the mainland, he could go anywhere in Scotland, even though one single car was in pursuit after him. They really had no control of where he was going or what he could do once he had reached the mainland.
Officers following Finlay note he seems to be preparing to make a stop.
He goes to a village called Dorney, and it is in the village of Dorney that he visits a house, a very specific house. This house belonged to a retired osteopath, John Mackenzie, who lived there with his wife Faye.
He pulled up outside and made his way towards the house, in particular towards the living room window. At this point, he's still armed with the same shotgun that he'd used to kill John McKinnon. And he positions himself 2 or 3 foot away from that living room window and waits for someone to enter the room.
Police had been in hot pursuit of MacDonald and had arrived at the Mackenzie home almost immediately afterwards. They then were able to shout across to MacDonald, "Don't do whatever you're planning to do, put the guns down." MacDonald ignored everything they said.
He stands at the living room window and observes Faye Mackenzie go into the living room. He then lifts the shotgun up and fires 2 shots into the living room through the window.
The discharge of the shotgun shatters the glass of the window and results in very serious injuries to Faye.
He then enters the property and goes into the living room where John Mackenzie is attending to his wife. He then fires a shot into the left-hand side of John Mackenzie, leaving a very large, gaping wound, again causing blood loss and very serious injury.
Despite having just had a shotgun wound, John Mackenzie wrestles Finlay MacDonald in an attempt to try and get the firearm.
Whilst they are wrestling, Faye Mackenzie, at this point, also very seriously injured, very bravely steps forward and grabs a metal toilet roll holder and uses it to strike Finlay MacDonald to, again, assist and protect her husband.
At the same time, police make their way into the property. Now, the bravery of the police at that time is not to be underestimated. They weren't in possession of firearms, it was purely batons and tasers. that they were equipped with.
They went in and saw that Finlay still had somewhat control of the firearm, that they deployed their taser and batons to subdue him and effectively disarm him. And at that point, he was placed under arrest. And that brought an end to what was that hour-long episode of violence from Finlay MacDonald.
It would have been a very traumatic incident for the officers. They knew what he was going to do. They knew and observed him walk into John Mackenzie's house. But they're getting told by their bosses, don't go in. But ultimately they took that decision to go in and subdue him, and the bravery is off the charts. And it was a great judgment call for them to do that. They put the public safety above their own and managed to go in and successfully subdue him. There was so many other things that could have went wrong in that scenario, but they maintained professionalism, they maintained close cover, close contact, especially when they were following him. They were following him for about 40 minutes, which is a long time, and Finlay MacDonald knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't fazed with the police. He would have no second thoughts about turning the gun on them if he was given the opportunity. Faye Mackenzie received horrific injuries to her face. When a shotgun's fired, due to the type of ammunition that's contained within it, when the impact occurs, it releases a number of pellets, hundreds at a time, and Faye ended up sustaining a lot of these pellet injuries into her face, which were embedded. John Mackenzie received horrific injuries also. He received approximately 100 pellets into his bowel. He lost a kidney. 30 other pellets entered other organs in his body.
While John McKinnon's life was tragically cut short, the three others narrowly escaped the same fate. Rowena MacDonald spent 6 weeks in hospital after being stabbed at least 9 times, while John Mackenzie underwent emergency surgery to remove a kidney and dozens of shotgun pellets. His wife, Faye, survived a shot to the face, though to this day she still carries the physical remnants of the attack, with lead pellets remaining embedded in her skin.
The very next day, the 11th of August 2022, he is taken to court. He is charged with a murder and 3 attempted murders. He pleads not guilty. He attempts to blame his mental health issues, saying that he suffered an absence of mind and thought during the attacks. The prosecution were determined to prove that these attacks were carried out in a controlled and calculated manner.
While the defence seeks leniency through a plea of mental instability, the prosecution prepares to paint a very different picture. They intend to show the court that MacDonald's trail of violence across the Isle of Skye was a sheer act of malice. Edinburgh High Court, November 2024. Finlay MacDonald stands trial for the murder of John McKinnon and the attempted murder of 3 others, his wife, Rowena, and John and Faye Mackenzie. The defence is building a case for diminished responsibility, pointing to MacDonald's history of mental health struggles. However, prosecutors tell a different story, one of a man who didn't act on impulse, but with deliberate, deadly intent.
The trial of Finlay MacDonald took place on the 13th of November 2024 at Edinburgh High Court, and it lasted just under 2 weeks. Now, by this point, Finlay was 41 years old.
The trial took 2 years to come to court due to the fact that all 3 surviving victims had to recover from their injuries, and also the multitude of psychiatric and psychological testing that had to be done on MacDonald himself.
He attempts to blame his mental health issues, saying that he suffered an absence of mind and thought during the attacks.
MacDonald had a history of mental health problems. He was known to be an introverted character, was described as very awkward around people, and his mental health problems were to form the basis of his defence when he stood trial for murder and attempted murder.
MacDonald's defence team set out to show that he had a troubled past. hoping to uncover long-standing mental health struggles that might explain to the jury why a seemingly ordinary man reached such a violent breaking point.
Finlay MacDonald was a 39-year-old male at the time. He was married to Rowena MacDonald and they had 4 children together. And they stayed in the family home, which was within close proximity of the wider MacDonald family. He was employed locally as a marine engineer. Now, historically, he worked in Glasgow and was a nightclub bouncer in a really popular night spot in Glasgow called The Garage. He worked there whilst he was studying at the city's nautical college. MacDonald was known to have various mental health challenges.
During the legal proceedings, he was seen by a number of psychiatrists and psychologists, and he was diagnosed as suffering with depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and having a personality disorder, and it was found that he was on the spectrum for autism.
Amongst his former colleagues, they would have described him as someone who was a bit awkward, a bit more introverted, and lacked awareness of humour or different social cues. They also had a couple of nicknames for him, and I think that was more just down to his general persona. One of those nicknames was Furious Finlay, and that was down to his moody and serious demeanour. The other was Robocop, and that was down to his inability to detect jokes and to take things that were said very literally. I think that isolated him socially. When the news broke of this incident having occurred in Skye, it came to the mind of some of his former employees that he may have been involved, and it came as no surprise that he was ultimately involved.
MacDonald was a firearms enthusiast. In fact, he had 6 weapons in total.
He held a firearms certificate, and prior to the incident, he'd held that for about 15 months. He owned a Mossberg 410 pump-action shotgun, later confirmed to be the murder weapon and the weapon used in the various attempted murders. He bought that for £625. It's very uncommon in Scotland to possess a firearm. Normally, firearm certificate holders are members of gun clubs, farmers, but someone that's not a member of a gun club, a firearms club, not a farmer who utilises it in the course of their work, is very uncommon. However, areas like Skye and more rural areas, there's more likely to be a higher percentage of the population that do have firearm certificates as opposed to urban environments. It's just due to the culture within the areas where gun clubs and hunting are known as enjoyable pastimes.
He worked out, he modelled his sort of physique on his Hollywood hero because he had his love of action movies.
He liked gun films, war films, and he admired the Rambo film and thought he was a sort of Rambo type himself. He was a really big, strong guy who possessed an arsenal of weapons. Even though he was quite quiet, introverted, his interests and his appearance made him very intimidating. When you couple that with his access to firearms and his state of mind at the time, it makes a very dangerous individual.
Although he struggled socially, investigators questioned whether more personal factors motivated Finlay's actions.
MacDonald denied all charges and lodged a special defence of diminished responsibility, claiming that his actions were due to abnormality of the mind. The defence claimed that he had experienced a severe mental episode brought about because of marital stress, chronic pain and undiagnosed autism. They stated that he descended into total darkness and as a result of that conducted or carried out numerous acts of impulsive violence.
Once it appeared in court, the defence threw its entire focus on his mental issues, that this was a one-off moment caused by the breakdown of his marriage, by his mental issues, and was not related to the fact that he was a violent man. This is not unusual for a mental health defence, particularly in the last 30 or so years. to be at the absolute front of a defence, particularly when there's such overwhelming evidence. It's the need to find out why, rather than a need to punish someone who had clearly done the crime.
Before these incidents took place, the relationship between Rowena and Finlay was strained, and Rowena had already started to make plans to leave the family home. Finlay started to suspect that this may have been for someone else. During the course of having thoughts like that, he accessed her phone using her PIN number and started to look through her text messages. Now, over the course of looking through her text messages, he saw some text messages which she was discussing leaving him and ending the relationship.
They'd been going through a tough time in the marriage, and when he saw this on the phone, he didn't react too kindly to it.
He does confront Rowena about the text messages, and it's at that point that he produces a knife and begins violently assaulting her.
Rather than talking things through in a rational way, he reacts completely abnormally in a murderous fit of rage and subjects her to a very ferocious physical and violent attack. MacDonald would have been fully aware that there were going to be very serious consequences for the attack on his wife.
Certainly murderous rampages are rare, but I've seen many times domestic attacks escalate because of tension in a marriage or tension in family relationships. But very, very rarely have I ever seen it to such an extent that he was prepared to make 3 separate attacks on 3 separate households in front of children.
Finlay MacDonald is what we would call a spree killer. And a spree killer is basically someone who commits a killing or killings or a number of attacks in a short period of time. It could be days, it could be hours, or in this case, minutes. Usually with spree killers, they will attack random people, spontaneous victims, basically people that they encounter whilst they go from one location to another and are being hunted down. This was different though, because Finlay MacDonald had a very specific list of targets. He knew exactly where he was going. He knew what locations he was going to. He knew who he was looking for. That was rare in comparison to other spree killers. In many ways, a spree killer is different than a mass murderer. A mass murderer will usually commit an act of mass murder at one centralised location, involving many victims in one burst of violence. This was a planned, calculated spree of attacks that took place just over an hour. So whilst it was a rampage of violence, it was controlled, it was planned. He knew exactly where he was going, he knew exactly who he was looking for. The problem with that is, it doesn't take away the carnage that's going to come, because the only person that has that knowledge is the offender himself. The police didn't know where he was going, but they were in a race against time, as if it was any other spree killer, to catch this man, to save more lives.
To accurately charge Finlay for his crimes, police need to establish a motive for each attack that followed the first against his wife, Rowena.
Rather than give himself up, he then takes the pump-action shotgun with a lot of ammunition and decides to go to these other locations. And he goes there to kill 3 other people. People who he believed had wronged him for different reasons. It was almost as if once this red mist, this murderous rage came over him, he decided to act on it further than just attacking his wife. He decided to go after other people who he believed had wronged him through the years. John was married to Finlay's older sister, Lynn Ann, and in 2013, Lynn Ann had given Finlay a birthday present. Finlay did not like the birthday present, and he threw it back at his sister. Lynn Ann's husband John took exception to this. They argued, and it led to a physical altercation, one in which Finlay MacDonald came off worse. For almost a decade, he let that build up within him. He became fixated by it. He couldn't get over it and couldn't let it go. That is why he went to murder John McKinnon that day. John McKinnon was quite a nice man. He was 47 years of age, was married to Finlay MacDonald's older sister. They had 6 children. He was a distillery worker. By all accounts, that day, when they had the physical altercation, he was defending his wife as any good husband would. There may have been an element of jealousy towards John McKinnon by Finlay MacDonald. John McKinnon and Lynanne McKinnon were in a relatively happy, stable marriage. Compare that with what Finlay MacDonald was going through, where his marriage was probably coming to a natural end, and he had this fixation and paranoia that his wife was committing adultery. In many ways, he was attempting to destroy John McKinnon because John McKinnon had everything that he wanted and did not have.
There doesn't appear to be any personal responsibility in relation to not only his relationship with Rowena, but also his relationship with John and that wider family. He is obviously looking to blame other people for the actions that subsequently took place on that day.
After brutally killing his own brother-in-law, Finlay still had one last score to settle.
John Mackenzie is a retired osteopath, and he had previously treated Finlay for back pain. Now, after this appointment, Finlay became somewhat obsessed over suing John Mackenzie because he believed that he had made his condition worse, had caused chronic pain in his body, and had taken life chances away from him. So that's where that grievance came from.
He'd actually said to his wife, I'm going to kill that man, I'm going to kill that osteopath. His wife had never taken it seriously, but MacDonald was absolutely serious. What it demonstrates is that this is a man who was completely unable to control his emotions, harboured a grudge for years and years and years, storing this grievance up, and then deciding in a very calculated and premeditated way that he was going to exact his revenge.
MacDonald's defence painted a picture of a man broken by psychological distress, but his trail of violence suggests a different truth. It depicts a man who turned minor slights into a deadly mission of revenge. November 2024, Edinburgh High Court. The trial of Finlay MacDonald for the murder of John McKinnon and attempted murder of 3 others, including his wife Rowena MacDonald, is drawing to a close. Finlay's defence team has argued for diminished responsibility due to an abnormality of mind, but the prosecution have set out to prove that the attacks were calculated and deliberate, and that Finlay should be sentenced accordingly.
Confronted with a diagnosis of autism, depression, anxiety, even post-traumatic stress disorder, that is certainly a cocktail for mental issues, but it's way, way short of mental issues which would be enough to decrease his responsibility for what he had done. The prosecution was able to show that he had a stockpile of weapons. Once he'd attacked his wife, he then armed himself for a small war, as they put it to the jury, and had specific targets in mind, which involved him getting behind the wheel of a car and driving some distances where he must be playing in his mind, not, am I doing the right thing, but I am determined to settle this. He held petty grudges. That was the core of the issue, not his mental issues.
When he attacked his wife, he is using a knife, and that may have been an impulsive act then and there. But when he goes to attack the other victims, he brings his pump-action shotgun with a lot of ammunition, a lot of cartridges. He is determined to have everything he needs to carry out these attacks. Part of that could be that when he attacked his wife, they are in their own home. There is no one there to help her. She is smaller than him in stature. He can easily overpower her. But when he is going to confront John McKinnon, he knows that John McKinnon is a man who can give him more of a physical challenge. And he is aware that 9 years previously, when they last had a physical altercation, John McKinnon got the better of him. So he goes this time with his shotgun, ready to have the upper hand. And also when he goes to attack John and Faye Mackenzie, he is aware that he's not dealing with one person, but 2. And he is also aware that John Mackenzie could also present a physical challenge. And that is exactly what happens. They both present a physical challenge and they attempt to subdue him and wrestle him and get the shotgun off him. So MacDonald was aware of the differences between the victims before he set out to attack.
Ultimately, the jury rejected his claim of diminished responsibility. The prosecution put forward that it wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, it was planned, premeditated. He had enough ammo for a small war, and the victims were specifically selected. It wasn't random people in the street, it wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, it was planned, premeditated, and a very callous way that it was undertaken.
The prosecution were able to point to the planning involved in these attacks. They were able to point to the calculated and controlled method that he used, that he actually went in his car with the shotgun and the ammunition. It wasn't spur of the moment. They were able to point to the grievances that he held against these people. In other words, he had reasoning, he had a motive, he had very real hatred and anger towards these people to cause them great harm.
As the trial draws to a close, all that's left now is the sentencing. Will the jury see through his claims of diminished responsibility, or will MacDonald be able to evade justice for his horrific acts?
On the 29th of November 2024, he was found guilty on all 4 counts, so for the murder and for the 3 attempted murders, and was sentenced to 28 years without parole.
Before sentencing, Judge Lady Drummond said this: John McKinnon's wife, sister and children's victim impact statements are heartbreaking to read. The event is so scarring it has left them angry, shocked, sad and in deep anguish. A loving husband, brother and a wonderful father, the last 2 years have been unimaginably difficult for them. They miss and grieve for him daily. They feel they have lost the life and soul of their family and that their lives will never be what they once were.
I think the sentence was justified because these were 3 extremely violent offences. 1 man lost his life. 3 other people were extremely lucky to survive. They were left with long-lasting physical scars and emotional and mental trauma.
There were mental issues, no question about that. He has the right to put forward what he thinks is his defence of why he did it. The jury were able to see through it very quickly. This man went on a murderous rampage through his own decisions in life. He made his mind up. There wasn't any mental issues that forced him to take the steps that he did.
It may be when Finlay MacDonald serves his 28 years, at that point he'll be 70 years of age, but it may be that it still may not be safe to release him back into society. He may remain a very serious danger to the community.
Justice has finally been served, but the unprecedented nature of this violent crime leaves a lasting impact on the surrounding community of the Isle of Skye.
This is certainly one of the worst and most violent cases that I've heard of in recent times. It would have been a shock and would continue to be a shock for the whole community of the Isle of Skye. I'm sure it continues to live with the community day to day, even now.
Over the last 40 years there have been rampages, many innocent people gunned down, and sadly MacDonald must take his place amongst those notorious killers who go on a rampage. The fact that he was captured alive and didn't take his own life and was able to face justice puts him in a separate category. But it's still one murderous rampage too many. It's a case that I'll never forget.
I remember sitting in the office and it coming in at the time, and you only hear wee bits of it because some incidents get locked down. After a wee while this incident was locked down, but you can remember hearing the officers shouting in, and you're just hoping that they're going to be okay as well, especially when they're saying that they're following the suspect. He's armed with a firearm. You know, based on what's happened and the information you've got at the time, what he's capable of. Your heart's in your mouth at that time, and you just hope that everything's going to work out the best it can considering the circumstances.
I think a case like this stands out because it is a very sad reminder that in the most beautiful and tranquil of places, we can see the most horrific and ugly crimes occur. And not only does it impact the victims and their families, but the impact goes further, and it impacts the entire population. It brings back bad memories, it evokes fear, and sadly, the question why always comes up.
Any one of these rampages, when they occur, immediately the police have to look at themselves and their vetting process for every gun licence. No one wants to discriminate against people who lawfully hold guns for particularly good reasons, whether recreational or whether for their work. But there has to be the tightest possible control. Certainly the police have to ask themselves, did they vet this man correctly or in sufficient depth? I suspect they would answer, we can't cover mental issues. But even so, the fact that guns are available, albeit on licence, it still creates a situation where someone can go on a rampage.
I think he's obviously been someone who's been troubled his whole life. He's experienced a number of mental health challenges, and unfortunately for his 4 victims, they manifested themselves in him in the worst possible way.
For such irrational behaviour and such violent attacks to occur over the most trivial of matters and the most minor of grievances, I would say Finlay MacDonald is a psychopath.
The unpredictability of the spree that Finlay MacDonald went on was unbelievable. He inflicted serious violence on his wife in front of his kids. I can't fathom why he done that. Then kills his brother-in-law by discharging a shotgun at close range in front of his sister, tears another family apart. Then drives to a respected doctor's house for what appears to be a very minor grudge that he's got, and then to shoot the doctor's wife, shoot the doctor, all because he thinks he wasn't treated right. The injuries that were sustained by all parties who came into contact with Finlay MacDonald were absolutely horrific. I'll have life-lasting changes with them.
I think Finlay MacDonald's attempts to portray himself as a victim in all of this, as someone who wasn't to blame, is indicative of the man that he is. A man who does not like to feel inferior, does not like to be in the wrong, does not like to accept responsibility.
I would only describe him as a psychopath, someone that feels no remorse, doesn't feel any guilt, but fully aware of what he's doing, of what his capabilities are and what he's going to do.
John McKinnon was a much-loved member of the community and much loved by his family. He was a loving husband, he was the father to 6 children, and his loss is still painfully felt.
March 2015. The peaceful community of Ifield in West Sussex is in for a shock.
Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, police get a call about a car that's on fire in a quiet rural road.
As they approach the vehicle, they see an arm sticking out the boot.
She'd been partially burned, which hindered the identification process.
The remains were identified as that of Janet Miller.
Cause of death was inhalation of toxic fumes. She had been burned alive.
Police discovered Janet was an inpatient at a mental hospital.
How on earth did Janet ever get to a situation where she's now wandering the streets?
Somebody who should have been looked after was let down so badly.
A body doesn't get into the boot of a car and catch fire without foul play.
Located on the rural fringe of West Sussex, Ifield is a historic neighbourhood, known for its traditional village charm and tranquil countryside character.
It is one of the oldest historical settlements in the Crawley area, and although it is close to Crawley, it has a very rural feel to it, a very close-knit community, almost a family feel to the place.
Ifield's a historic area. It's got a history going all the way back to the Middle Ages. It's got one of Britain's oldest mill ponds. As Crawley, the neighbouring town, has got larger and larger, it's become absorbed into that metropolis.
It is quite a rural area despite being quite close to Gatwick Airport, which is one of the busiest airports in the UK.
But even so, it's more rural than metropolitan. You think quiet country lanes, think golf courses.
It's an area popular with dog walkers, joggers, runners. It's a place where you can get lots of peace and quiet and to get away from city life.
It's more sort of country lanes and isolated houses rather than the sort of urbanisation of central Crawley. It's a haven really from the woes of modern life and the last place you'd ever go to think that a murder could take place. Crawley is a bit of a crime hotspot for Sussex, but Ifield itself is very low crime indeed.
There's not any type of crime that is particularly high.
This is somewhere that you'd be happy raising your kids. This is a place when you go for a run without fear that someone might attack you or harm would befall you.
But one tragic event is about to shatter the peace in Ifield.
One of the most popular places in the town is Ilfield Golf Club. While popular with tourists, as you'd expect, it's located next to some secluded country lanes which can get very dark, and it's rather isolated. It was there at the golf club where a burnt-out Volkswagen Jetta was found.
Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, police get a call about a car that's on fire in a quiet rural road.
A concerned citizen reported a burning Volkswagen Jetta in a secluded car park just off Rossborough Road.
As there is such a low crime rate, it comes as quite a shock when a report comes in of a burning Volkswagen Jetta seen near the golf course with plumes of smoke rising from it. So police are alerted and they turn up at the scene and just believe initially that it's a burnt-out car. However, as they approach the vehicle, they see an arm sticking out the boot.
So the idea that a murder would happen here is astonishing. The idea that somebody's life would end in the worst possible way here is completely unheard of. This isn't a place where horrific crime happens, and so the revelation that a car has been found burning in a quiet country road in the middle of the day, and not only that, there's a body inside, is something that shatters the peace and tranquility in the area. The local area is abuzz with fear and anxiety. There's immediate anguish and concern about who is this poor individual, what has happened. It's unusual enough and scary enough that there's a burnt-out vehicle there, let alone one that's involved in what sounds like horrific foul play. Immediately, police secure the scene. They cordon off the surrounding area, all exits, all entrances to the roads.
There was some initial difficulties identifying the body, which was found in the boot.
The immediate priority of the Surrey and Sussex Major Crime Team is to identify the victim.
Now, it was hard for the police to confirm because of the partially burned condition of the body, which initially hindered the identification process.
They can see it's a young female, but because the body has been burnt, it's very difficult to actually identify who this person is.
However, at that time, the police were aware that there was a recent missing persons report made the night before in relation to a 21-year-old female. They got a physical description of that female, and when they observed the remains that were found in the boot, there were striking similarities between the missing girl and the body that was found. In order to achieve definitive identification, that would require forensic identification. There was fast-track DNA analysis done of the remains that were found within the boot.
This was the body of 21-year-old Janet Muller. Janet Silver Muller was born on November 25, 1993, and raised with her twin sister Selina by their mother Ramona in Berlin, Germany. Ramona raised both children on her own, and they were a very close-knit family of three.
Janet's outgoing, she's sporty, she's adventurous, she does everything with her twin. They both love football. Janet loves playing in goal. They have a wonderful life.
We're both happy kids. Janet was described as being a very enthusiastic young girl. She had a very happy childhood. Her and her sister were inseparable. They had the same group of friends at school.
They played for local teams in the Berlin area. Janet in particular was mad keen on football, and she was quite a talented goalkeeper. They had a wonderful, happy childhood together. They played together constantly, were in each other's company, as often twins are. These two twins were inseparable. They did everything together. She was clearly a bright girl. At school, she was well liked. Her teachers thought that sometimes she might talk very quickly, but that didn't mean to say that she didn't know what she was talking about. One teacher said that towards the end she clearly had some emotional problems, but this wasn't going to hold her back. It didn't handicap the fact that she was a quick learner. I don't think the teachers thought for a second that there was anything out of ordinary, as she was just a normal 18-year-old girl.
At the age of 18, Selina and Janet both decided that they were going to move to the UK and to go to separate universities. This would be the first time in their life they had been apart.
This was quite a major decision for them both. That's quite a moment of growing up and of independence, not just from their mother, but from each other. It was a very adventurous and ambitious move to up sticks entirely, not just out of the home, but abroad. But it shows the extent of just how forward-looking and outward-looking she was.
So it must have been pretty daunting for them moving to a new country. I mean, they came from Germany and they've moved to the UK at the age of 18. They spend all their time together, and yet they go and live separately in separate universities.
Janet decided that she wanted to take a degree in international event management and settled on the University of Brighton, but at the Eastbourne campus, which is about 20 miles from Brighton on the coast.
Initially, when Janet moves to Brighton, all is going well.
Janet was excited to attend university and have a bit of freedom and live the student life.
Brighton's got a young student population. It's a great place for a night out. It's right on the coast. There aren't many better places in Britain to be young and a student than Brighton. There's a lively scene for student nights.
It's the only resort in the country which never closes down. It's rock and rolls 365 days a year. It's full of clubs, of restaurants, pubs, and exciting things to do. And for a teenager, especially one who's visiting England for the first time, it's like Aladdin's cave of excitement.
On top of that, it's only an hour short train ride from London, and so you can explore so much of Britain's culture, history, architecture without going too far.
Janet was quite reserved, but she did enjoy her time there, and she had lots of friends. She was a stereotypical student.
Janet is really well liked at university. She does keep to herself, but everybody really likes her, and she integrates really well into university life. However, during her third year, things start to change.
Alarm bells started ringing regarding her mental health.
Janet displays concerning changes in behaviour, and those closest begin fearing for her safety. Ifield, West Sussex. On the 13th of March 2015, a burning car with a body in the boot is found on an isolated road. Police identify the victim as 21-year-old Janet Muller, a German student at Brighton University. In her third year there, Janet begins to really struggle with her mental health while being separated from her twin sister.
It's a massive culture shock. These are twins who are generally closer than any other types of siblings. They've been together for 18 years. they're adults now, and they're going to finally separate. This would have an effect on anyone. At the end of Janet's third year, that became particularly prevalent. As Janet approached her final exams, her mental health was really starting to deteriorate. Her mother recalled a call in which Janet said she was being followed by someone.
She thought someone had been standing outside her bedroom window. Police were contacted on that occasion, and it was deemed that no person was found within the vicinity.
However, Janet's behaviour starts to spiral out of control. She's behaving very oddly, and her friends are really concerned about her. In fact, so concerned that they contact her sister, and her sister Selena comes over to see what's really going on.
That caused her sister to be quite concerned for her mental well-being and for her welfare.
Over the next few weeks and months, her sister and friends at university started to think that perhaps this was all inside Janet's head and that no one was actually stalking her.
People could sense that things were not quite right. Her behaviour started becoming more and more bizarre, and her family was starting to worry as well. Those close to Janet could see there would be a complete change.
She becomes very withdrawn, she becomes paranoid, she talks about people potentially following her.
She also began reportedly wandering around her house completely naked, a behaviour that can only be described as out of the ordinary.
This isn't the Janet that they know.
As Janet's well-being worsens, her sister Selena takes action to help.
Janet's mental health continued to take a toll and continued to spiral. That caused her sister and a close friend to approach the university or Brighton's wellbeing staff to ask for some support for Janet.
They've already told the university and their welfare officers involved, and her housemates and her sister are keeping an eye on her, but her condition doesn't really improve. It becomes more uncontrollable and erratic.
As Janet's erratic behaviour continued, her sister took her to A&E at Eastbourne District General Hospital.
While there, they're waiting to be seen by doctors. However, it's been a long wait, and Janet runs off.
Shortly after, a missing person report was filed. Due to her mental health, she was deemed as a high-risk missing person, which brought about an urgent police response.
When a report of a missing person comes into the police, they will assess how urgent the need is to look for this person and how broadly they need to extend their search in order to try and find this person. You will have low risk, medium risk and high risk. Because of Janet's mental instability, she would have been deemed high risk due to the chance of her harming herself. At this point, there was a real concern that she could try and commit suicide. If somebody is graded as high risk, this means that police will do everything they can as quickly as possible to try and find Janet. This would include if she had a phone with her, they would be pinging her phone to see if they could find out where it was. They will do urgent CCTV work from the hospital and trying to track where Janet has gone.
Police search for Janet using all available information and equipment.
There would have been a number of priority lines of inquiry identified in a situation like this. That would include CCTV inquiries, house-to-house inquiries. They would call in specialist search teams to do searches of the surrounding streets. They contact immediate friends and family of the missing person to establish if they'd made any contact, if they know any details of their whereabouts.
And doing this, they have managed to find Janet on CCTV.
She's found sometime later, still in a hospital gown at a local train station. This is obviously very concerning.
Janet's sister was very concerned, but there was also a bigger picture here. Their mother had suffered a stroke the year before, was not feeling well, did not need the added pressure from thinking that her daughter was in any way in trouble. The sister took it upon herself, and once the idea of taking her to hospital in Eastbourne had failed, she had to be taken to proper mental health establishment.
Obviously, with her behaviour causing alarm and Janet in a vulnerable state, they admit her to Millview Hospital, where she's detained under the Mental Health Act. They assure Janet's mum and her sister and all her friends that she's going to be well looked after, and they're going to take good care of her, and that she'll be assessed and detained in this hospital for her own good.
It was a place where doctors and nurses could assess over a 24-hour period and find out what would be best for Janet.
She was detained for approximately 10 days. Due to her being deemed high risk, there was high security in place for her, and she should have been kept under close and constant observation.
Janet's family is told that if they want to speak to Janet, they need to ring through the facility, but none of their calls are ever answered.
They keep her there at the facility. However, despite it supposedly being a secure facility, she escapes 10 days later.
Well, from the very first day that she arrived, she made it plain, just as she had at the Eastbourne Hospital, that she wasn't going to play ball, that this was no good, I don't want to be here, this is no good, I want out. And it wasn't long before she was good as a word and absconded.
On the 12th of March, after several days of being in Millview, Janet went missing again. This was at a time when she should have been heavily monitored. She presumably walked from the facility for around an hour, arriving at a local beauty spot called Devil's Dyke.
Why she decided to go in that direction, it's unknown. But there was certainly, fortunately, loads of people, tourists and holidaymakers and what have you, to see her and to report her.
The only reason police find her is because locals are so concerned about this girl wandering around, clearly quite mentally unwell. The police go out there and they find her and they take her back to the hospital. However, very shortly after that, Janet escapes again.
Within hours of being returned to the unit from her first escape attempt, you would have thought that doctors and the staff would have actually taken steps to ensure that this couldn't possibly happen again. On the contrary, that night, Janet found it very, very easy to slip out through a fire exit and be got into the Central Hove and onto Brighton.
In order to get out onto the street, she would have to have scaled an 8-foot wall.
There had been many attempts by other patients to escape before this had happened, and the authorities had done nothing to block off this obvious security loophole.
She was wearing a long-sleeve jacket and a short skirt above her knees, the entirely inappropriate clothing for that time of year and that time of night.
It was discovered later that there were actually only about 3 staff working that night, and it took them many hours to realise that Janet was missing, and it wasn't until 10:15 that evening that they called the police to report her as a missing person.
There's no question that Janet was in a hugely vulnerable state. The staff at the unit knew she was in a very vulnerable state. She should never have been remotely given the opportunity to escape.
This was the 3rd time a vulnerable woman had escaped from a mental health institution. Once again, she was placed in the high-risk category, and police quickly searched the streets, contacted her friends. They were desperate to find Janet.
They throw everything at it this time. They know that she is seriously mentally unwell and a real danger to herself.
But despite all efforts, tragedy strikes. Who did Janet meet that night, and what happened to bring about her horrific murder? On the 12th of March, 2015, 21-year-old high-risk patient Janet Muller escapes from Millview Hospital, East Sussex. She's later found and returned. However, that same evening she escapes again. Police desperately search for her through the night, but this time she cannot be found.
Police are deeply concerned, staff are deeply concerned, and even more than that, her family are absolutely frantic. Her friends are looking for her sister is looking for her. They're in a position where they've got this young woman that they care deeply about, but she's also vulnerable. She's not in a position to look after herself. They're desperate to find her, and they're leaving no stone unturned to do that.
To make matters worse, she was wearing extremely thin clothing. For the time of year, this caused even greater concern for her welfare.
They fast-track CCTV to see if they can ascertain where she has gone So in order to try and find CCTV, which of course would be in businesses, buses, shops, anywhere nearby, they would have started close to the hospital and then moved their boundaries outward from there. So the first thing they need to do is try and find the footage of Janet leaving the hospital. And they managed to do this quite quickly and find her on CCTV at about 10:30 that evening.
There was a whole series of sightings, partly from eyewitnesses and partly CCTV. This was between 10 o'clock and 2 in the morning, of her walking through the streets.
There was various sightings of Janet throughout that night, over several CCTV cameras over the course of several hours.
Janet was seen leaving Portslade train station.
She was then captured on CCTV emerging from the subway.
Approximately 23:48 hours, a taxi driver observed Janet walking across Trafalgar Road.
At 23 minutes past midnight, Janet was caught on CCTV walking southbound on the Boundary Road.
And around 1 a.m. she's seen arriving in a petrol station. The petrol station clerk reports that she asked for a soft drink, even though she didn't have any money, and he gives it to her.
The staff member within the petrol station was concerned enough to ask Janet if she was okay, and she replied that she was, and she went on her way.
Janet at this point is in a disorientated state. It's not known what her intentions were.
Around a quarter of an hour after that sighting at the petrol station at 1:15 a.m, she's seen approaching a vehicle.
She seemed to lean down and talk to whoever's in that vehicle. She doesn't get into that vehicle, but she's seen walking away.
This CCTV footage at 1:15 a.m. is the last known footage of Janet alive.
Janet firstly disappeared completely, that no one else was to see her until the following day, when a burnt-out car was found by Ifield Golf Club on the borders of Crawley.
Investigators are left in shock at the discovery of Janet Muller's body in the burnt-out vehicle.
Police tracking Janet Muller now realise that this is accelerated from a missing persons inquiry to a murder case.
At approximately 2:05 p.m, police were made aware of a burning vehicle just off the Rusper Road. A local resident had noticed smoke emanating from the vehicle, a strange man walking away from the scene.
They thought, well, this was clearly some sort of act of vandalism, but there was an arm sticking out of the boot, and they realised this was a murder hunt. This is astonishing, really, considering the surrounding area, which was very rural, very countrified to one side, and just a row of very nice houses on the other. One thing that the people in Ifield are not used to, that is screaming sirens. And suddenly their area was invaded by police tape, sirens, blues and twos, a tent erected in the woods over this body. This is not what local people were used to. This is not a place anyone would expect a burnt-out car, and least of all, a dead woman. Is there a killer around? Is there someone living around here? Who has done this?
So a post-mortem took place on Janet. It was revealed that Janet sustained blunt force trauma to the head, which rendered her either unconscious or at the very least stunned. It was, however, confirmed Janet was alive at the time the fire was started.
The cause of death was not her injuries, but inhalation of toxic fumes.
Janet was still alive and breathing when the car was set on fire.
She had been burned alive.
The police team at the scene carried out a rigorous investigation. They had to be very careful removing the vehicle because of its condition.
The location would be sealed off as a crime scene and a forensic examination would take place.
A team of specialists is assembled to unravel the mystery of Janet's murder.
A biologist would be there to obtain any biological samples, which would include DNA. There would be a chemist to collect the relevant samples in relation to the fire that had been started, and there would have been a fire investigator there also to determine, was this fire made deliberately.
Police found a green jerry can in the back of the car.
Police now want to find out as soon as possible who is the owner of this car, this Volkswagen Jetta vehicle that they found smoking in a country lane. They do background tests and they find that it's a rental car As it's a rental car, it also has a GPS tracker. Police are hot on the trail of this GPS data.
The GPS statistics showed the vehicle had travelled into Brighton on March the 12th. It remained in the Brighton area until the early hours of the 13th of March. Then there was a slight gap before it moved back up to the Crawley area and towards London.
They also have an eyewitness who says they'd seen this vehicle driving erratically late at night in the Crawley area.
Sussex police had tried to build a picture of Janet's final hours. They were trying to work out how this had gone from a missing person investigation to a murder one. It was unclear how Janet had ended up in that vehicle and what relationship, if any, she had with the driver.
The priority line of inquiry there is identifying who was the driver of that vehicle. It was subsequently identified that the vehicle was hired on the 11th of March, the day before Janet went missing in the London area, by a female.
Police are now desperate to find the owner of this vehicle. They do background checks and they learn that the vehicle is a rental car. They find that the rental was made to a young woman who lives in London. Police immediately head to that address. They interview the young woman who says, actually, I hired it not for me but for my boyfriend who isn't able to hire his own car. They hear that she hired the vehicle and her boyfriend took the car and disappeared for several days with it. His name is Christopher Jeffrey Shaw.
He wasn't there. She didn't know where he was. A manhunt started. This was number one suspect and he had to be brought in as quickly as possible.
Investigators looking into Shaw's background discover a history of convictions and antisocial behaviour.
Christopher Jeffrey Shaw is 27 years old, he's got kids, he lives in Beckenham, South London. But this isn't an ordinary family man.
They quickly found out that Shaw was a man of very dubious character indeed. He had a long history of blackmail, of harassment, of intimidation. He made his living in the very murky world of the drugs underworld. He was a very unsavoury character.
He was described as a bit of a Walter Mitty character. He tended to lie a lot and made up stories that made him sound far more interesting than he actually was.
Bit of a Jekyll and Hyde who makes stuff up, fast and loose with the truth, and what he says doesn't always play out as the reality.
CCTV and phone data established his movements in the lead up to the fire.
So GPS was able to show that Shaw had this vehicle for at least a couple of days. On the 12th he was seen driving into Brighton, and he was there until the 13th, and then the vehicle headed back towards Crawley again. This obviously gave him the perfect opportunity to have picked up Janet while he was in Brighton.
GPS tracked the vehicle moving in the Ilfield area where it stopped at a petrol station. It was there where Shaw paid £2.50 for some petrol which he put into a green jerry can. That was the can found in the back of the burnt-out Volkswagen Jetta.
But it is Shaw's girlfriend that reveals the most crucial information to investigators.
He made disclosures to his girlfriend at the time that he'd got himself into a bit of bother. After that, he said he'd killed a young girl.
But the girlfriend said, well, I didn't believe it because he is such a pathological liar, constantly embellishing everything. Little did the girlfriend know at the time that in fact that was one night when he was actually telling the truth.
Police are obviously really concerned about Shaw and his activities. They need to get hold of him before he does anything else. He could potentially be a really dangerous man. So police undertake a massive manhunt trying to find Shaw. They need to find him as quickly as possible. He is plastered all over billboards, he is all over the papers, he is all over the news.
Anyone with information about him is told to tell the police.
There was an extensive nationwide manhunt to find Shaw.
On March 17th, 2015, Shaw turned up at a police station and handed himself in.
Upon handing himself in, he was arrested for the murder of Janet Miller.
He was taken down to Sussex for questioning. As soon as he arrived at the police station down there, the custody sergeant told him what circumstances were, that he was going to be interviewed on suspicion of murder. He first said, this is a nightmare which I'm not waking up from. And he then says, I'm not being done for something I haven't done. And then that was it.
He's completely uncooperative. He just replies no comment to pretty much every question. And when asked about what happened on the 13th of March, he doesn't give anything close to a useful answer.
It is his legal right. However, at the same time, you would think when you're arrested and interviewed for murder, you would be, hold on a minute, I want to give my version of events over. Christopher Shaw chose not to do that. He remained silent, answered no comment to every question. It can be very frustrating when a suspect provides a no comment interview. There is various interview tactics that can be used to counteract a no comment interview. And one of these questions would be, is there anything you can tell me which can eliminate you as a suspect and take you out the picture? Christopher Jeffrey Shaw would have been asked this, still answered no comment.
While the police investigation was making serious inroads, they had to break the news not only to Janet's sister but to her mother. By this time, she had left Germany in alarm to desperately come to Brighton to try and find her missing daughter. She flew to Gatwick Airport and took the train to Brighton, where she was met at Brighton Station by Janet's sister, who had to sit her down quietly and just break the news. She's been found and she's dead in most horrific circumstances. The impact of this news on an already poorly woman struggling to recover from a stroke can be imagined. What a devastating blow this would have been.
Janet's family are desperate for answers, and the police are desperate for answers. However, despite many months of investigation, Shaw doesn't say almost anything until the case arrives at Guildford Crown Court. Shaw suddenly changes his statement.
Finally, Shaw's uncooperative resolve begins to crumble in the face of the looming murder trial. He provides police with vital new information, but given his background, the question remains, can he be trusted to tell the truth? On the 17th of March 2015, 27-year-old Christopher Jeffrey Shaw turns himself in to police in connection with the murder of 21-year-old Janet Muller in Ifield, West Sussex. After months of zero cooperation with authorities, Shaw's resolve begins to crumble in the face of the looming trial.
So by February 2016, Shaw was brought to Guildford Crown Court to face trial for both murder and manslaughter of Janet Muller.
Murder is the unlawful killing of someone where there is an intent to kill or cause serious harm. Manslaughter is the unlawful killing of someone where there's no intent to kill or cause serious harm. So essentially, manslaughter is the unlawful killing of someone when you didn't mean to kill them.
Shaw is facing unusually two separate charges. The reason for this is police know or believe that Shaw was responsible for her death, but without a motive and without the critical pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that explains when she got into the car, what happened to her and why she was killed, they cannot critically define exactly what happened. They know that she sustained head injuries, they know that her body was found in the boot, and they know that horrendously, horrifyingly, she was still alive when the car was set on fire because they have traces of smoke in her lungs. However, they don't have the full pieces of this jigsaw.
The police were in no doubt that Shaw was the man who had killed Janet. They had him in the car. They knew that he had driven the car that night down to Brighton, that he'd been in the Brighton area at the time Janet went missing. He then drove back to Crawley, dropping off various places. One of those stops that involved at a petrol station where he bought £2.50 worth of petrol in a can, put it back in the car and headed off. He then torched the car, he then abandoned it, fled to a local hotel, hired a cab in a false name and headed back home up to Beckenham. They had that much, but that's all. They didn't have any link of putting Janet in the car. They didn't have the link of him picking up Janet, and they had no knowledge of what Janet had done between the last time she was sighted and at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. So there were huge gaps in the police case.
This is a complex case, not because of many complicated details, but because the absence of critical information.
After months of no-comment interviews, Shaw finally starts talking.
Shaw told the court that all this prosecution case was complete rubbish. He was just an innocent party in all this.
Shaw had changed his story a number of times leading up to court, and one of those stories was that 2 males had taken the vehicle from him.
He says that he had met 2 local drug dealers called Steve and Mickey who had forced him at gunpoint to dispose of this vehicle. At this point, Shaw said, "I didn't know what was inside it." He takes the car to a rural, abandoned spot. He bought a small amount of petrol, £2.50's worth, at a local petrol station, poured it all over the car and set fire to it. As he was leaving the vehicle, the boot was open. Looking inside, he suddenly sees, to his horror, that a body that he did not know was there was lying in the boot.
Finding Janet's body, he claims he tried to pull her out but was unable to, and therefore walked away.
Every claim that Shaw made in his version of events was not found to be true. There was nothing to corroborate any of his claims. These 2 men that he mentioned weren't even found to exist.
The police had to go through the formalities of checking out his story. And of course, who could find someone called Steve or someone called Mickey? It was a complete fool's errand, but they had to go around and do it. They knew that these people didn't exist. If they existed, he certainly didn't give them enough information that they could be traced. It was a very cynical defence and a very cynical use of the law.
So the GPS on Shaw's phone showed that he was actually with that vehicle and had been for many, many hours, and that included the time that Janet was in the boot of that vehicle. Though interestingly, on his way back to Crawley on the 13th, Shaw is seen heading to a petrol station where he buys £2.50's worth of petrol, which he puts into a green jerry can. And instead of putting this jerry can into the boot of his car, he puts it onto the back seat.
The actions of Christopher Jeffrey Shaw at the petrol station point entirely towards someone who was planning to dispose and cover up a crime scene. The fact that he put the petrol in a jerry can, it went in the back seat, didn't go in the boot, indicates that something or someone was within the boot, was taking up the space.
Most people would put a jerry can in the boot of their car.
The actions of Jeffrey Shaw provide more than a sufficiency evidence to convict him of murder. He was known as a pathological liar. The 2 men that he said had held him at gunpoint to burn the vehicle were found not to be true. His version of events was contradicted by the expert pathologist's version of events as well. The actions of him, such as purchasing the petrol in a jerry can, the trips that he made, the analysis that was carried out showing his movements, all showed Shaw to be involved in the planning and disposal of Janet Miller.
But will this evidence be enough to convict Shaw?
So at the end of the trial, the jury retires to consider their verdict. It takes them 9 hours and 42 minutes to come back and say that he is not guilty of murder. However, they did find him guilty of manslaughter.
Considering the overwhelming evidence that was there against Shaw, 9 hours is a very long time, especially in what appears to be an open and shut case like this one.
There were unquestionably gaps in the prosecution case, and that allowed a degree of doubt, perhaps, to enter the jury's mind. Did Shaw know for a fact that she was there and he wanted to kill her, or did he actually assume she was dead, in which case that would be just manslaughter? That small degree of doubt in English law, which has to be guilty beyond reasonable doubt, was enough for him to escape from the murder charge, but that he was convicted of manslaughter. On returning the manslaughter verdict, Janet's sister stormed out of court in anger and fury at what she saw as a miscarriage of justice, and Shaw himself rather pathetically put his head in his hands and started crying.
He's given a sentence of 17 years imprisonment for manslaughter. That's a very, very big sentence for a manslaughter conviction. I think the judge knew that there was a sufficiency evidence there to convict Shaw of murder, and he handed him down the highest possible sentence he could to reflect the severity of the crime.
So the average sentence for manslaughter is 2 to 10 years. So 17 years is a really good outcome in that respect. However, it would have been better if he'd been found guilty of murder. So having been found guilty by the jury, the judge then summed up at the end.
In his closing remarks, Justice Jeremy Stuart Smith makes his personal thoughts on the case very clear.
The judge provided quite a strong statement in his words to show upon sentencing.
Mr. Justice Jeremy Stuart Smith said this was as close as a guilty of murder verdict that he could ever imagine. He said, "The only difference between you and a murderer is an extremely thin line."
The judge made it perfectly plain that if he himself had been sitting on the jury, he would have come to a very different decision. He said that it was shocking and deeply, deeply callous.
To burn someone to death is a particularly vile way of killing someone. And at every stage since you set fire to the car in which she died, you have lied and lied in your attempt to evade all responsibility for what you did. But you are responsible for killing a young woman who did you no wrong. The only reason why you are not guilty of murder is because you didn't have the common human decency to even check whether the body in the boot was alive or dead.
So the judge certainly did his best to impose as high a penalty as possible.
It felt utterly bizarre that this was a manslaughter verdict. This was somebody that walked away from a car with an individual, a young woman, in the boot and set fire to it. The only thing that they couldn't decide was whether this young lady had already perished or whether she had knowingly been killed by Shaw himself. When you hear manslaughter, you hear, yes, this person is responsible for somebody's death, but the underlying notion is that this wasn't deliberate. But how can somebody walk away from a car knowing that there is somebody inside, having set fire to it, and it not be murder? Understandably, the Muller family are absolutely horrified with the verdict.
They knew that he was guilty. They knew that he was responsible for Janet's death. But they had to accept that the jury had found him guilty of the manslaughter. And 17 years was the most that they could hope for, that he would be kept behind bars. That probably wasn't the outcome that the family wanted.
I think there was a sufficiency of evidence there to return a guilty verdict based on the evidence available. And it would have ultimately provided more closure for the family, seeing a guilty verdict for murder being returned.
There were gaps definitely in the prosecution case, and to this day there are still gaps in our knowledge about what happened that night. First of all, how or why did Janet get into Shaw's car? And equally, why was she murdered? There was no seeming motive. To this day, this still remains a mystery.
On top of being let down with a conviction, Janet's mother is also extremely disappointed with the lack of care Janet received at Millview Hospital.
Following the court case, Janet's mother, Ramona, decided that she was not happy with the way Millview had dealt with her daughter, and she brought a civil claim against Millview. She won this, and it was settled out of court, but it did mean that Millview had to reassess their practices, and they certainly tightened up on the security within the mental health institution.
There's no question that the health service was guilty of the most serious failings imaginable. They had a really skeleton staff on duty overnight with no sense of communication with the day team at all to look after way too many patients. It was a recipe for disaster, and a disaster had happened.
The NHS did issue an unreserved apology to Ramona and Celine. However, this was not going to bring their daughter back. But hopefully it would prevent similar things happening to somebody else in the future.
Janet was a beautiful, talented person who fell on hard times with mental health issues.
The case understandably had a catastrophic impact on those who knew Janet and those who were left behind by her horrifying early death.
Following the verdict, Celine never went back to her studies at her university in Kent. Instead, Celine went back to Germany, where she'd studied psychology.
She now uses that degree to help the family of victims obtain justice through the experiences that she's went through with the death of her own sister.
This is a very fitting legacy for Janet, whose own life, ambition and career was cut short so tragically.
you.